Hey, what's up guys? Welcome to a bit of a buyer's remorse video where we're talking about Biomutant. Let's get that out. Okay, you saw that in the thumbnail and title, blah blah blah. Biomutant is an open world game where you play as a little mutated creature after the world ended, post-apocalyptic, whatever. You can choose from classes, there's spellcasting, there's gun gameplay, there's swords, and they said it's got an Arkham style melee combat system. They compared the world and the exploration to a game like The Legend of Zelda, Breath of the Wild. But the only comparisons I can draw here is unfortunately more along the lines of bad advertising and cash grabbing. Now the game is an indie game made by a small team of I think 20 people. They did mention that they did outsource some of the stuff, so let's round that number out to 30 to 40 people. Granted, that is still a very small team in the grand scheme of game development. The thing that I have the most issue with this game is the sound. The combat and the audio from combat is very soft. A lot of the audio doesn't seem like it's even in the game. It leaves a very disjointed feeling when it comes to the game's combat. When you feel like you're doing badass things and badass moves, there's no audio to give you feedback. It makes it feel really cheap, to be honest. Now, audio in games is ridiculously important, and it is something that most people won't notice if it's there and if there's good audio. If there's exceptional audio, people will notice it. But if there's just good audio that suits the game, no one would even notice it or point a finger at it. But when there's bad audio or a complete lack of audio, people will notice. It makes the fighting feel a lot less impactful, it makes the gunplay feel a lot less impactful, and it makes the magic or psi skills feel a lot less impactful. What the psi skills do, so you have a choice of melee classes, range class, and psi, so your caster, wizard, magic style type class. And the melee combat looks fun and it looks really good. The promotional team did a banger on that, and you'll even see in the gameplay footage in the background, it looks really fun. But the enemies' tells are off screen, which makes it very hard to dodge. It feels like there's an input delay, which might just be me, but it feels like there's an input delay, and not being able to just lock onto an enemy like you would in Dark Souls or any of the other like ARPG style action games, then it kind of leaves you dodging around the arena, kind of not knowing where you're going to hit or what you're kind of aiming at. And maybe playing it on keyboard and mouse would have been a better feel, but on the controller it just it just felt kind of weird and disjointed. And when you did actually hit enemies and when you were in the thick of the combat, it felt lackluster. There wasn't the audio to try and help balance things out and make it feel any better, to be honest. And then when you come down to the magic system, which is another thing a lot of people have been pointing out, the magic system, you're locked out of, I think there's 10, maybe 12 abilities, and then for the psi class. And then when you actually choose the light or the dark path, which sounded really cool, harkening back to games like Fable, where making your decisions would actually impact how your character appeared and how your character would act, and prompts and decisions that you could make with it. This game kind of lacks that. It kind of threw the dark and light path in, and they're like, hey, on top of that, let's give it a bit more flesh and have it lock you out of certain abilities and give you access to certain other abilities. And the only thing that ended up doing in the end is giving you like 5 total abilities to work with when you're playing with the psi class, which was really disappointing, and it really limited how you play. And then on top of that, there's like bio skills as well. Like there's one that you shoot this green plume of smoke out the enemies, and then that would make the enemies attack each other, but it would also make the enemies attack you, which would make it harder to dodge, because while they're under the effect of the spreading, like picture the locust swarm ability from Diablo. It makes this little green swarm around the enemies, right? It's that, except it creates an absolute ton of visual clutter, so you wouldn't even be able to dodge the enemy's attacks or see when they're attacking you, because all the enemy tells are behind this green plume of smoke. Now, the melee combat also said that it would be like Batman Arkham Asylum or the Batman Arkham series, which had an incredible, absolutely incredible melee combat system that was impactful and felt good, and you felt like an actual badass Batman when you were countering enemies and knocking them to the ground and like doing finishes on them. This game tries to do that, but because of where the camera angle is situated and how the camera is behind your character, you often don't see the tells. And with the lack of audio combat, when you do actually parry enemies and block enemies and dodge enemies, it just kind of felt disjointed and unpleasant. There were also quite a lot of enemy attack animations where the animation or tell wouldn't even finish, but you would get hit. Like there's a desync in the timing there, which also made the melee combat really frustrating. And then I moved over to gun combat, which I thought would feel a bit better, but then with the lackluster audio, you were just like jumping around the back, like going pew pew pew, jump around the back, pew pew pew, jump around the back, with no lock on and like a soft targeting assist. It just felt weird. Like the combat really, it looks really good from an outsider's perspective, but when you're actually playing it, it doesn't feel good whatsoever. Like it looks really cool, but it doesn't feel good or feel cool at all. It feels really mediocre, to be honest. Then when you get to the story, it's very simple. You are a little creature that is trying to help restore balance, and to restore balance you have to defeat the 4 world eaters, which are eating the roots of the world tree on different points of the map, and you need to go beat these bosses. And then when you beat these bosses, you get specific abilities. Like one of them is the glider, similar to Breath of the Wild's glider, and that is pretty much the only similarity you can point out between this and Breath of the Wild. There really wasn't much else, to be honest. The exploration is boring. They would point out loot spots on the map that you could go to. It tells you exactly where the loot is. You find the loot and you leave. Like there's no real like combat puzzles. There's no real challenge to it. It's just go there, get loot, go to next area, get loot, go to next area, get loot, go to area, get loot. And then we get to the best part of the game, which is the crafting system. And the crafting system, you can change hilts on weapons. You can change out specific parts, which would then give modifiers. Like every bullet you shoot would hit an extra time. So instead of shooting 10 rounds and hitting 10 times, you shoot 10 rounds and hit 20 times. And there were crit builds you can do on top of that to increase your damage output ridiculously, which made it really fun, in the sense of you just nuke down a boss in a few seconds, which is really satisfying. But once again, without the audio feedback and all of that, there's just some visual feedback, and even though it's a really cool crafting system, everything else kind of sucks. I'll be honest. There's a mount system in the game, which is also kind of cool, emphasis on kind of cool, and the characters' designs, like the creatures, look really cool, but with the way that they did the narration in this game, there's a complete disjoint and disconnect between what you see and what you feel when you're interacting with characters. So how it works is you would interact with a character and the monster would speak gibberish like, and then the narrator would be like, he said that we should go to said place and do said thing. And then you're like, oh, okay, cool. And then you go and you interact with the next character and he's like, and then the narrator's like, oh, he said that your feet smell and you should go wash them, and then you go wash your feet. And like there's just, that was a dumb example, but you know what I mean. They would give you, the narrator would voice over them and then give you instruction of what they said, which creates a huge, absolutely huge disconnect between what you feel for the characters. Like some of the NPCs look really cool, but when the only interaction you have with them is just going, and then the narrator's like, we should go to that town and collect that thing for them. Then you're like, oh, cool. Just another box to tick on the way there. And there's no connection between you and these characters. You don't want to help these characters. You don't feel the need to interact with them or go out of your way for them because you've got a connection with them. It's just you going, click on character, mash A until the narrator speaks. Okay, narrator speaks. Okay, cool, let's go. Now I know what I need to do. There's no like immersion in the world. And I applaud them for going the narrator says everything route. But that's definitely something that's bitten them in the butt here. I think if there was some way around that, like narrator, it should be an option where the narrator can either have the narrator speak over everyone or each individual character, instead of going be like, please go and help me with this, there's a big monster and I'm scared, and then carry on. There really is a big disconnect with that. That combined with the combat, combined with the lack of actual magic spells and things like that, the saving grace really is the crafting. The crafting made it bearable and created enough build variety and interesting things that you wouldn't necessarily just sit there and yawn and give up on the game. I pushed through to finishing the main story. It was mid, and I wish I stopped about 4 hours into this game. There's no real reason to play through all the way. Honestly, I thought I was essentially waiting for things to get better, waiting for things to be more interesting, waiting for things to get better, and waiting for things to get more interesting. And I got to the end, I'm like, wow, that was really, in all honesty, just kind of a waste of time. In closing, I want to say that this game's crafting is incredible. The world looks really cool. It's just a pity that you don't actually ever feel like you care about the world really, because the characters in the world are disjointed from you. The audio is absolutely the worst part of this game. If the audio was there so that the combat would have more impact and feel better, then sure, I would recommend this game. But the audio's lackluster design, or just being missing altogether from specific cutscenes and things, is an absolute killer. It destroys any sense of connection you have with the world. And then the narration over it as well. I like the narration. I enjoy games with good narration, but the fact that that is writing over ordinary character conversation, which also creates this disconnect between you and the world. And then just the quests are very iffy. The loot and exploration is really iffy, and the combat tells and things like that with the specific angle of the camera, and you're getting hit, but you know you shouldn't have been hit because the animation wasn't done, and things like that. It just creates this really, it honestly feels like I was disconnected from the game. Like I was playing the game, but I wasn't invested in it. I wasn't immersed in it. I was just sitting there hitting buttons on my Xbox controller, watching enemies die and then getting hit out of nowhere, and I was just frustrated. It was really frustrating. And then to top it all off, the price of this game is a AAA price. If the quality was AAA, but the game still had these core design issues, like the narration and the lack of actual reason to explore and stuff like that, I kind of would have gotten it. If the game had the audio in, I could forgive a more expensive price, but this game should really be between $30 and $50. I feel definitely not a full-on AAA price. Perfect price would have been like $35, $40 for me. But the fact that it's a full AAA price for an indie game that was marketed as this massive, we're breaking the mold here kind of a game. Like they broke the mold, but the shape that they made out of the stuff they broke out of the mold was just janky and terrible. And it's quite disappointing because I was excited for this game. I've kept an eye on it kind of over the past few years because it looked really interesting. I was like, oh, this is such a novel and cool concept. Yeah, the concept was novel and cool, but the execution was really terrible. If they were to bring out DLCs and large patches for this game, then that touched on like fixing the audio. Pardon me, fixing the audio. I know the next big patch that's coming out is making it so that you can put the gibberish on 0, and what that would do is the characters wouldn't even speak gibberish. You would just walk up to the character, the NPC, and interact with them, and the narrator would be like, he says go do this and this and this, which would save you time, but it wouldn't help with the immersion and this disconnect I feel with the characters in the game. Honestly, I didn't care. The entire game, I just played it because I was curious and I wanted to see if it got better, but all that kept happening throughout the entire game is I just sat back every time, like after every play session, I just sat back and I'm like, I just don't care. Like it sucks, but I don't care. There's no reason for me to care about this game. Normally the combat or something is interesting enough to keep you going, but here the combat was a whiff, the story was a whiff, the exploration was a whiff, the crafting was really cool, but even that at some stage you're like, do I care? No, I just don't care. So yeah, this was a ridiculously long rant about Biomutant. If it's on special for $30, I recommend you picking it up. You'll have some fun and see what I mean. But other than that, I could not, in all honesty, recommend anyone buying Biomutant in the current state of things. And yeah, that just about wraps it up for my run video. If you enjoyed this video, hit the like button. Let me know down below in the comments what you actually think of the game. And I'll chat with you guys there. Check out the rest of the channel if you enjoyed to see it. Subscribe. I'll catch you guys in the next one. Cheers.